we hear a lot about how we're using technology to kind of transform the way that we work. We talk a lot about infrastructure, we talk a lot about technology and down at the bits and bytes level, but when we try to get it all up to a point where users can have seamless things that make their lives significantly less miserable, that's where we win the discussions. And one of the things that we saw today in the technology keynote was smart digital workplace. And when Partha was up there talking about smart digital workplace, I thought to myself, I'm like, I don't know how this is going to work out. And then they started doing the thing where they went into a conference room and they were automatically able to transfer the call in there. And like suddenly every horrible nightmare that I've had about conference bridges and who's muted and all that other stuff disappeared into thin air. And I just wanted to jump up and give the man a standing ovation for building something that kind of fixes so many of my frustrations with the way that this technology works. So I want to take a few minutes to kind of talk about this smart digital technology. And I'm going to start with Mr. John Welsh, because you have probably the most experience of anyone at this table dealing with these kinds of applications.
I don't know how I feel about that, but okay. So like you, I saw the demo, and in the end, I thought it was really impressive what they were doing there. But to be totally honest, when he started down the path of it, I was like, oh, yeah, I've seen this before. Because there are other companies out there that do this whole transferring call from the mobile device to the endpoint. But the thing, in retrospect, when I started thinking about it, that was really impressive was the fact that this was a multi-vendor solution. It wasn't one vendor doing the network and the endpoint and the conferencing solution and all that. It was an Aruba network. It was Zoom or Microsoft for the conferencing solution, and so it was tying all these pieces together and doing it in the back end through APIs, which makes me believe that you could potentially add in any number of services as long as they were API enabled. So the fact that they were able to do this and have it be kind of agnostic, so to speak, I think was pretty impressive with what they were doing there. Yeah, the modularity of the system was really huge. It's not one of those things where you have to order like 17 different SKUs that were all from the same company and kind of hope and pray that it fits together. I mean, but they were showing off some really cool stuff. It wasn't just, hey, look, I can ask Alexa to tell me when the next meeting is. The solution that allowed people to check in during a fire drill or during some kind of inclement weather thing to make sure that they were actually safe was, I can think of 100 schools and universities that would love to have a technology like that because it reduces their liability.
Except now you have to order 17 different SKUs from 17 different companies and hope they can work together.
Best of breed.
There's a lot of what ifs in a scenario like that, and I think it was Atmosphere last year or maybe even the year before where he said on stage, the more polished it looks up front, sometimes the more hectic it is in the background.
Dom was about his experience about a tablecloth in the restaurant.
Yeah, the restaurant, yeah. And so, I look at a solution like that and I look at all the moving pieces and parts to it, and I just wouldn't even know where to begin. Personally, and I don't know how you do that in addition to, one of the things we didn't talk about is securing all of the various pieces individually. We talked about user traffic and applications, but all these inner application hooks and making all that work in some sort of a reliable fashion, that's going to be messy.
Yeah, it's going to be messy, but the fact that we can actually do it is a huge step forward compared to, even 5 years ago where everything was in a silo. And now, granted, some of the technology, I will admit, is a little dodgy on usefulness. I'm not going to ask my speaker a whole bunch of questions. I play Jeopardy on it. That's about it. But the fact that that's a thing, and this is one of the things that I have to deal with, and I'm sure you guys have to deal with as a technologist as well, something that doesn't sound all that awesome to us, the CEO is going to eat it up. It's like, look, we can transfer we can transfer the meeting directly over to the big screen that we paid for. And that's how you get big screens installed in your office. Jake.
So I thought it was cool as a technologist who cannot work the video system at work. I was like, yes.
The second I've seen you cannot work.
I cannot work. It's bad. But the part that I thought was cool was they're taking a bunch of stuff that they don't necessarily make and gluing it together. I love that it enables us, and I think we're really early in a lot of this. And as the guy who's usually writing the script that hacks a lot of stuff together, it's not always something I want to run in production. And so From my perspective, I think we're getting down this path of what can I do, and it's more of how should we do it. And I think there's some bigger pieces that we aren't seeing of how do I take and blend all of these APIs across these manufacturers together and support it, as well as what happens when Zoom changes their API and breaks everything. And now I have all of these 17 things that not only do they not work together, but I don't know how to use them individually.
You have a house of cards that just fell over.
Yeah, and yeah.
So I think though, Jake, that's the thing. You and I like APIs. We like gluing things together. We have made that transformation from engineer, a network architect, network owner operator, and looked past our layers and have gone up the protocol stack into the application development side of things to glue this together. But to be honest, what does that have to do with probably a lot of you in this room about your roles? Your roles are focusing on the physical layer, the Mac layer. You are focused on the 802.11 PHY. You don't want to be messing around with this necessarily. So what's that say about our industry and the push for this whole, mobile first, going digital, doing all this? We are being asked to go outside of what most of our wheelhouses are, which there's nothing wrong with that. That's certainly acceptable. But at what point do we draw the line and still say that we're network engineers, we're network architects, we're not application developers? I'm in the same boat as you. I hack together scripts. I prove that something works. I'm not going to productize most everything because it's going to say, okay, go find me a development house that can go do this for me now.
And I think that's okay. I think
right.
the watching the progression of the manufacturers, they're like, I'm going to put APIs in it, and everyone's like, yes, I have an API, and I have no idea what to do with it. and now we're at the point where it's like, okay, I can see how to put it together. I think the transition is when it starts turning the other way is you start picking your components and you buy a software package from somebody that says, I glue this together for you. And I think that getting that complexity, we don't ever deal with complexity, we just abstract it and shovel it up to another layer. And eventually somebody will come along with a big scoop and another layer to put it into, and hopefully that's the place where we get to. I think we're still really early on that.
Will that scare away the younger generations though? Will that looking at that slide today, where it showed the, what was it, 11 components that needed to go into?
The older generation.
This is true. But are we getting to the point where people say, oh, I want to be a wireless engineer, and then they look at this and they're like, I didn't like programming in college, I don't want to do this now.
So actually, I want to take a quick audience poll, because this kind of blends into something you said earlier. How many of you technologists in the audience have ever ended up owning a solution because it got dumped on your desk and you were told to figure it out, and when you did, now suddenly you're the person that's only ever allowed to put this back in? I see one hand. Yeah. There you go. So something Blake and I were having a discussion about on Twitter during the keynote, when we were talking about the chat bot that can authorize guest users. You could be the person that owns the guest kiosk in the front desk and have to make sure that it's constantly being updated with security patches, and that the software didn't update and break something overnight, and the receptionist is mad because now it's displaying things in orange instead of black, and now we have an option to just have somebody install an app on their phone, scan something, do the hard work with other applications like OCR and things like that. And Blake's response, I believe, was, well, couldn't we just all type this into a web form? I'm like, that's what we've been doing.
But that's the thing is, we said that legacy tools, and I even mentioned it, is that legacy tools need to evolve, which is certainly true. But at some point in time, there's a reason we don't have a better hammer today.
Well, Blake, let's be honest. I could type in the 26-character Amazon gift card code, or I could use a camera to take a picture of it. I'm perfectly capable of typing. I just don't want to.
No, I think that's a perfectly good example of it, is just look at the complexities of a clean business card that was hard to...
And that is true, but the other thing to think about, first of all, kudos to Aruba for doing that demo live.
Oh, no kidding.
That's guts right there. But the idea that, yeah, the technology isn't perfect, but when it works, It's amazing because now I don't have to fight every other thing in the system. Because if the only problem is that I had too many espressos this morning and I can't quite get the camera to hold still, that's a whole lot easier than they changed the API on the back end and I'm sitting here with a bucket of Python glue trying to put things together. Richard.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the code and API issues could be easily settled and figured out through a certification process. Like, this is certified to run with these versions, and just keep that kind of together. And then one of the greatest thing that I saw them show off was the whole fire alarm. All your safety marshals are automatically in this conference call together based on APIs that are built in with the fire alarm, does the whole chat bot, sends the alert, you join the conference, you join the meeting. That's life safety, and that's another thing that you don't want to be in the way of. So if those people already get in the call and people have the ability to mark themselves safe or not safe and everybody sees that.
Amy.
The sustainability of it, though, is what gets me, because we've now made the system so complicated and interdependent, and they're not all from one vendor. So when you'd want to do an upgrade as a veteran of many complicated upgrades, you get to the point where you're just like, I'm not upgrading, ever. And that has certain implications with it too.
But
It's in the cloud.
Let's think about it from that perspective, though. We've had to rely on companies to tell us for so long, you've got to make this so that it doesn't break when it upgrades. And now we have the power to go back to them and go, this is what the API documentation looks like for version 3.1, and when I go to version 3.4, it better look like this because there's a whole bunch of stuff riding on it. And if it doesn't, I'm writing a check to your competitor tomorrow.
Except people don't read release notes today. What makes you think they're going to read API docs tomorrow?
And you know, some of that's I have a little background in software, but that's a software maturity thing. I mean, that's the microservices. I'm guilty of it in some of my stuff I prototype. It's a big, ugly script, and when something changes, I have to go change it in 25 places.
Right.
And that's the part that's not sustainable. But doing it more the right way, and maybe this is another product or those things, but where it's like I have one place where I have to touch this, and if it breaks, it's not revamping this giant system. It's I go touch this one line of code and it fixes it. I think that those are maturity things that this is new to our industry. We're going to have to figure it out. The software guys figured this out 20 years ago.
Right.
So, but it is a risk. And I think it's one of those things where having some of those pieces, those big complex systems start to become a little simpler.
Richard.
Let me ask you guys, do you actually see this as being a coding type of thing, or do you think Aruba in their smart workplace is going to have just point and click, add your people, type in your login, and it'll do all the connection for you?
No, there's no out-of-box solution that works.
Well, so the impression that I got when they were presenting, I mean, and it could be that I'm just looking at the language too closely, but they're saying that these things that they demonstrated were a result of partnerships with Zoom, with Microsoft, with these various companies. The word that they're using, partnerships, makes me believe that they have some sort of agreement between the two, that if things change on one side, they're aware of it and they can make changes on their side. Now, they didn't come out and say that, so who knows, but that's kind of my takeaway from.
I look at the smart workplace as being more than just a series of interconnected things that make it so you can talk to Alexa and have a voice call. You know, we didn't talk anything at all about the APs turning themselves off when people weren't in the rooms, right? And that's another aspect that has zero interdependencies with any other systems.
Right.
And it's simply a smart enablement that's a chip shot. So I think it's a multifaceted marketing term, and so I think that we've got to be cautious necessarily about torpedoing something because it's just a bunch of API calls that are interconnected with a bucket of Python glue, versus a feature that's actually baked, matured, and rolled out that genuinely enables cost savings. Like, that's the stuff that really excites me.
I think you're talking about the confluence of where the smart workplace and the digital workplace combine.
I am.
So one of the nice things about coming to conferences like this is that we get to hear exciting new ideas and we get to see exciting new technology challenges being solved by companies that kind of get it. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we have these discussions in public, that we have these kinds of debates. Not everybody on this panel agrees with everything that was presented here, but by having the discussion, by having the conversation, we can find a happy medium. And I've always heard that compromise is the solution that exists when nobody gets what they want. I don't necessarily think that that's true in technology. It's flexible enough that we can get enough of what we want that everybody's happy, even the users. And let's face it, if we can keep the users happy, this is going to be a perfect thing for all the rest of us. So